Turning back now to our coverage of the president's State of the Union address, the president used his speech to tout his economic accomplishments, but didn't spend any time talking about impeachment. His remarks were widely criticized by Democrats, including House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who ripped up a copy of the speech right after it was over. Joining us from Washington is Republican strategist Matt Gorman. He's a former aide to Mitt Romney and Jeb Bush. Good to see you.
Hi, good morning.
So what moments of the speech stood out to you as the strongest?
I have two, really. The first part, when he really rattled off all these economic statistics, that's his strongest case for re-election. He really went in depth and got a rhythm going. The second was, it really kind of reminded me of his background in TV. He's like the best producer for TV out there. The dramatic moments when he reunited the military family and gave that child a scholarship. Look, these State of the Unions can be very stale and really monotonous affairs. I'll be very honest, I almost tuned out myself. But those were ways to kind of give a little excitement, and I think he knew that.
Yeah, I think you saw, a rare moment of bipartisanship when that soldier was reunited with his family. Also, an incredible moment. General McGee there, Charles McGee,
absolutely,
a member of the Tuskegee Airmen, famous Red Tails, being promoted to Brigadier General. That was an incredible moment. The guy's 100 years old, and he looked like he was still in his 60s. So that was a moment that I think across the political spectrum, everybody was able to revel in that. But there were a couple of others that I think you saw where Democrats did not applaud, and you could see the facial expression of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. He was criticized, the president was, for his remarks about protecting Americans with pre-existing conditions. I want to play what he had to say, and then we can discuss.
I've also made an ironclad pledge to American families. We will always protect patients with pre-existing conditions.
But, Matt, as you know, the Trump administration has tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act, including its protections for people with pre-existing conditions. So how do you square what the president said last night with what he's actually trying to do?
Yeah, no, I worked at the NRCC, the House Campaign Committee, back in 2018, so I'm very well aware of what happens when health care becomes the dominant issue in the campaign. Look, I think when Republicans are talking about Medicare for all, it enables us to go on offense. That's when we're winning. When we talk about replacing Obamacare or eliminating pre-existing conditions, that's when it becomes tougher, and Democrats tend to go on offense. That was a big issue for them as they took back the House, again, back in 2018. So look, I think what we need to do is, obviously depends on who the nominee is, but keeping the focus on their health care plan, Medicare for all, and the effects of that is the winning message for Republicans later in the year.
Let me ask you about the USMCA. That was a moment of, again, rare bipartisanship in that we saw both Democrats and Republicans working to craft that piece of legislation. Although during the speech, the president said that the USMCA will create 100,000 new high-paying American auto jobs. In fact, that's an invented figure. The number is 28,000 jobs, according to the US ITC report. But does the passage of that piece of legislation, is that a sort of light in the dark corners of the divisions in this country for you as a Republican? Do you see opportunities to work with Democrats?
I do in some aspects. I'll be very honest. I think, as you alluded to before, the atmosphere was extremely partisan last night on both sides of the aisle. Politico described it as essentially one big "you lie" moment, referencing the Joe Wilson outburst from about 10 years ago. Democrats were trying to shout him down. Republicans were chanting 4 more years. It was really unlike any other atmosphere I've seen in there. So you're right. I think it's also important for both sides, especially those Democrats who won in Trump districts, but certainly the president and other Republicans, to go to the voters and say, look, during these last 2 years, we got something done, especially for those Democrats who really all the folks hear about is impeachment back home.
Matt, as we noted at the top, you're a former aide for Senator Mitt Romney, who was one of 2 Republican senators to vote for calling witnesses in the impeachment trial. You worked with Governor Jeb Bush. The president and Senator Romney and Governor Bush do not have a very warm relationship. I wonder, I don't know if you still get the opportunity to talk to them, but I wonder how for example, a guy like Governor Bush who comes from his Republican credentials are as solid as anybody in the Republican Party, of course, going back to his father. And I wonder if when you talk to them, do they see these strains, these divisions that exist, not just between Democrats and Republicans, but even within the Republican Party, or have they, at this point, given up the ghost and essentially have acknowledged that the Republican Party is no longer the party of George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush or Ronald Reagan, but it is the party of Trump?
Well, yeah, certainly any party takes its cues from its leader. I mean, look back when George W. Bush was president, folks were very bullish over overseas engagement. Certainly, I think that's shifted now, led by Trump. Trade, free trade, where it was maybe about 10, 15 years ago, to where it's a little bit more America first. I haven't talked to Jeb Bush in a little while. We talked about the weather in Miami. That was the last time I talked to him. But look, I think you're absolutely right. There is the biggest difference between Jeb and Donald Trump is style versus substance. As you mentioned before, Jeb Bush transformed Florida in a conservative image for the better, where, again, with the difference we saw in 2016 was Trump's really bombastic style. And to kind of, in a way, relate that, look, I think the witnesses and the divisions we've seen the last couple of days, if you can even call them divisions, they're on display for the next couple of days. But let's be very honest, the entire Republican Senate conference will be united later today when they vote to acquit the president. So, look, I think at the end of the day, the witness thing might be a little more process. I think when we get down to it, voting to impeach the president or convict the president, that's where really the rubber meets the road. I think that's where you see Republicans united.
Matt, one last question before I let you go. So sticking on that point that we were just discussing with regards to Governor Bush, President Bush, the two presidents, there had always been a sense that Republicans, for example, loved Ronald Reagan. And even Democrats admired Ronald Reagan, and Republicans loved George H.W. Bush, and many Americans of whatever their political stripes also admired him. I wonder, in talking to your colleagues, your friends, your peers in the Republican Party, they certainly are willing to be loyal to this president. They're certainly willing to stick up for this president. But do you hear in Republican circles that President Trump is as admired as those Republicans that we're talking about, or is there more sense of fear in that he could use his Twitter account, he can use the power of his base to attack you and primary you, which is why they go along with a lot of what he does?
Look, I think it's certainly, in some ways, they see it as a means to an end, right? I think even the folks that disagree with him, even you ask Jeb Bush or Mitt Romney, they would praise the policy outcomes that a Republican President Trump has done. And certainly, I can't underscore it enough, there have been some big divisions between President Trump and the rest of, say, the folks he ran against in 2016. Mm-hmm. But I would say 85% of that would be what a President Bush, President Rubio, President Cruz would have accomplished in office. And in terms of the Reagan and Bush parts, let's remember, President Bush left office with a 35% approval rating back in 2009. Many Republicans crossed over to vote for President Obama. It wasn't until, I would say, 4, 5, 6 years ago that he really became admired once again, but not only by Republicans, but by Democrats. You see the warm relationship he has with the Obamas. Look, I can't see into the future. I can't say if that will be President Trump or not. I think a lot of it comes from hindsight and really the softening of those edges once they leave the political space. John McCain's another perfect example. Unfortunately, he certainly passed, but they ran against him in 2008, and that was a very hard-fought race as well.
Yeah, and Matt, as you know, the president in the new Gallup poll is getting close to a 50% approval rating, which has never happened in his presidency before, and he's up to 94% approval within the Republican Party. The president frequently touts the 95% number. He is very close to hitting that, according to Gallup. So, you made some great points, Matt. Always great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Same, Vlad. Have a great day.
All right, you too.